Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Fantasy Football Prodigy podcast. My name is Tyler Anderson. I'll be your host today, and this is episode number 3 of the Fantasy Football Prodigy podcast. So if you're looking to be a fantasy football prodigy, you found the right place. In this episode, we are going to recap the NFL Draft AFC teams. We did the NFC teams in the last episode, so if you want to check that out, make sure you listen to this episode and then go check out the NFC team episode, which would be episode number 2. That way you have a little bit of a recap of all the teams. We're going to talk about the rookies, what it means for the rookies that were drafted, but we're also going to discuss what it means for the veterans who were on these depth charts already across the NFL. And before we get into it, the intro song for this episode is Misty Air by Aquatic Pets. My friend Spencer, he makes music, so go check out Aquatic Pets on Spotify. I have the link in the description. I'm recording this episode on May 15th, 2024. I don't know if I'm going to be posting this on the 15th or tomorrow on the 16th, but we are going to get into the news. So if some crazy news happened on the 16th and I don't talk about it, that's probably because it happened after I recorded this. Before we get into the news, please make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you are listening. We do have a video podcast on YouTube if you're into that kind of thing. If you want to see my ugly mug, just yapping over here about football. But let's get right into it. We got a little bit of news to discuss here because it's been a while since I posted my last episode. Just a lot of things going on. But we'll get started here. The Cardinals sign wide receiver Zay Jones after he was released by the Jacksonville Jags. It's a 1-year deal worth up to $4.25 million. He had visited the Titans, the Cowboys, and the Chiefs after being released by the Jacksonville Jaguars. Kind of a surprising move. I mean, I know that depth chart is a little crowded, but I thought he was a nice depth piece for them. But I have Zay Jones on my dynasty team, and I think this is a great landing spot. He had his pick of a lot of teams, and it might have been exciting for him to go to the Cowboys or the Chiefs. Maybe not so much the Titans, but the fact that he picked this spot might mean, hey, maybe they told him he's going to be involved. And, obviously they drafted Marvin Harrison Jr. with the 4th overall pick. He figures to be, that alpha number 1 wide receiver. He's a generational prospect, so they say. So he'll be the number 1 there. And they do have Michael Wilson and Greg Dortch as well in that wide receiver core, even though I feel like the team hates Greg Dortch. I feel like they're always trying to not have him on the field. But Zay Jones could slot in as like that number 3 wide receiver, maybe even number 2 if he can get more targets than Michael Wilson. And obviously, Michael Wilson, his stock has taken a little bit of a hit. I think a lot of people were kind of crazy to assume they wouldn't bring in someone in the draft. Like, I expected them to have, Michael Wilson to not just be the 1A of this offense. But, they draft Marvin Harrison Jr., they bring in Zay Jones. It's getting a little bit crowded there. I also have Michael Wilson and Zay Jones on my dynasty team, so hopefully, one of them steps up. But Zay Jones had a good year a couple seasons ago, if you guys remember that, as kind of like a streaming option off the waiver wire. Last year, he dealt with some injuries. He showed a good rapport with Trevor Lawrence, but now we'll see what he can do with Kyler Murray. He might be fantasy relevant depending on his spot on the depth chart, but he's on my dynasty team, so I hope it works out. And then obviously, they do have Trey McBride at tight end as well as another top target there. Almost forgot his name. Moving on with the news, the Miami Dolphins signed veteran wide receiver Odell Beckham to be their number 3 wide receiver in the passing game. It's a 1-year deal worth up to $8.25 million. This should help Tua and the offense in general. I don't think it hurts Tyreek Hill or Jaylen Waddle too much. I think those are still obviously the top options, and Odell Beckham is certainly not the player that we saw in his prime early in his career with the New York Giants, but I do think it's a good move for the team. They kind of needed a number 3 option there, so I think it's a win-win. And I picked him up in my dynasty league recently. He was cut by a rebuilding team, so I picked him up, and just someone I might, play as a spot starter due to injuries or bye weeks or whatever, but really probably just a deep league option, unless there's an injury that occurs to one of those top 2 guys, which I hope doesn't happen because I do have Tyreek, and I pretty much have every single player that we're covering in the news on my dynasty team, interesting enough. Here's a guy I don't have, Caleb Williams. He was named the starter by the Chicago Bears. We all knew that was going to happen, but it's interesting that the team didn't make him do the whole, we're going to make him win the job type of thing. So that's a little refreshing. Tyler Boyd finally signed a contract. He was waiting to sign this thing for quite a while. Signs a 1-year deal with the Tennessee Titans. It's a little bit crowded there. I have DeAndre Hopkins on my dynasty team, so apparently I have the entire league on my dynasty squad. But that depth chart is a little bit crowded. They signed Calvin Ridley. Already had DeAndre Hopkins on the team. So Tyler Boyd, he waited all this time after being the wide receiver 3 for the Bengals for years behind Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, just to now be the wide receiver 3 on the Tennessee Titans. A much worse offense, even though I think with all these additions, if Will Levis can, play good football, they might be a surprisingly good offense. But kind of ironic, he waited all that time just to end up being the number 3 once again. Rashad Penny, running back, signs a deal with the Carolina Panthers. And I don't know if I said this, but Tyler Boyd's contract was 1 year worth up to $4.5 million. Rashad Penny's contract 1 year worth up to $1.35 million. It's a crowded running back room. Miles Sanders, Chuba Hubbard, and then the team also just drafted Jonathan Brooks. So does this mean I don't know what they're going to do. Jonathan Brooks was drafted to be like the guy. Chuba Hubbard outplayed Miles Sanders last year and kind of moved him down the depth chart, but Miles Sanders is the guy getting all the money. So I don't know where Rashad Penny fits in, but I don't think it's a good sign for Miles Sanders. And he is another guy on my dynasty team, sadly. We'll see what happens with that. Another really mediocre signing, Chase Claypool, signed by the Bills, 1 year, $1.135 million deal. We'll get more into their depth chart later when we talk about Keon Coleman. But I have Chase Claypool on my dynasty team too. Funny enough, I once traded Deebo Samuel for him. Straight up, I didn't want to accept it, but all the trade charts, all my friends were like, dude, you gotta take Chase Claypool. And ever since then, he has been basically a Canadian League level football player, and Deebo Samuel has been winning people championships, especially it was right before he had that wide receiver 2 overall finish behind Cooper Kupp. I digress. Steelers decline running back Najee Harris's 5th-year option. Najee's been pretty good at times, but not really great. It does put his future in doubt with the team. Jaylen Warren, their backup running back, has been more productive on a per-touch basis with that team. So Najee Harris has had his inefficiencies, so he'll likely need to play well in 2024 to be back with the team beyond this season. The Bills sign MVS, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, 1-year deal worth up to $4.5 million. Again, a little bit of a crowded depth chart there, but the Bills just signed Chase Claypool and MVS. And the Lions and quarterback Jared Goff, they agree on a 4-year, $212 million extension with $170 million guaranteed. Yeah, good for him. Obviously, he fits what they want to do, and he's been playing pretty well. He's had some of his inconsistencies, but I think they just gave him over $200 million. They think he's the guy, so if you're the guy at quarterback, you often get a big contract. Speaking of big contracts, this is a defensive signing, but I think it's worth noting really quickly. The Tampa Bay Bucks and safety Antoine Winfield Jr. agree to a 4-year, $84.1 million deal with $45 million guaranteed. He's the highest paid defensive back in the NFL now. I wish the Vikings would have drafted him. I believe they did have a chance to draft him, but yeah, good for him. Not often you see the highest paid DB be a safety. I feel like it's usually a cornerback, but good for him. And then the NFL schedule released today, May 15th, 2024. Like I said, I'm not sure when I'm releasing this episode, but I don't want to get too in the weeds with it. But the Kansas City Chiefs will be hosting the Baltimore Ravens in the season opening game. And then just one more thing I wanted to note about the schedule. There is a Christmas doubleheader that will be exclusively on Netflix, from what I heard, which is a little bit interesting. Amazon Prime had their games, had those Thursday night games. Peacock was also airing some games on their streaming service, and now we have Netflix. Pretty soon, you'll need to have pretty much every streaming platform if you want to watch all of these games. I have pretty much every streaming service, so it's not a big deal for me, but I know a lot of people don't want to have to pay for all these services or sign up for the free trial and cancel, so it's a little bit annoying. I guess it's one of those things where maybe it's oh, well, we weren't going to air these games for everyone anyways, but now if you have this streaming service, you can watch it. But I feel like that's not really the case. I feel like they're just making it hard for people to watch, and it's just unfortunate. And in other massive news, the New York Giants sign wide receiver Allen Robinson. Anyways, moving on to the AFC 2024 NFL draft recap. We're going to be going over all 16 AFC teams. I don't want to spend too much time on, the late players, so I'll focus more on the higher drafted offensive skill positions, but I'll try to touch on, the later guys a little bit. Try to maybe touch on linemen just a hair, but we're really going to focus on those highly drafted difference makers. We usually see the higher drafted players make most of the difference in the league. There are late round picks that make noise every year. That's going to happen, but it's just very hard to predict, and it's hard for them to, make a difference, much less make the depth chart. But we see talented players go late in the draft every year. Again, if you want to watch the NFC draft recap after this episode, make sure you head over to episode number 2. This is episode number 3, so the one right before this, and listen to my NFC draft recap. Make sure to listen to that after this. We're going to start with the AFC North. No reason, just arbitrarily. That's where I want to start. The Baltimore Ravens. They went cornerback in the first round, drafted a tackle in the second round, linebacker in the third, drafted their first skill position player, wide receiver Devontez Walker, 6'2", 193 pounds, out of North Carolina. He has some explosiveness, could be relevant for fantasy for some games, but I really don't love the situation with Mark Andrews established as that, he's a tight end, but he is, their top option in the terms of targets. Zay Flowers is their number 1 wide receiver. Rashad Bateman is still there, even though he hasn't lived up to the hype. He is still a part of that offense. And they do have Nelson Aguilar there as well. So, he could surpass Aguilar. He could do it. But this team runs a lot, and Lamar Jackson, while he's extremely good and an MVP caliber player, he's just not the type of quarterback to supply multiple targets with consistent high-end production. He can get Andrew his, he can get Flowers his from time to time, but if you're the number 3 or number 4, even if you're the number 2 wide receiver with Andrews and Flowers leading the way, it's going to be hard for him to get his. So not a great landing spot, just looking at it off the rip. After that, another skill position player, Rasheen Ali, running back out of Marshall, 5'11", 206 pounds. Derrick Henry was brought in free agency to be the clear lead running back this year. He's definitely getting older, so this could be his last year. Maybe he's got 2 more in the tank. But after that, Justice Hill is still on the roster, as well as Keaton Mitchell, who flashed last year, but he's coming off of a brutal knee injury, so we'll have to see how he recovers from that. So there are a lot of names on this depth chart, but Ali could climb this depth chart and be relevant depending on how things shake out. He went undrafted in my Dynasty League's 4-round, 10-team Dynasty rookie draft, single quarterback. But I did pick him up as a free agent, so I'll put him on the taxi squad and see how things shake out with that. And then they also took a quarterback, Devin Leary, in the 6th round out of Kentucky. Really not much to say there. That's Lamar Jackson's, that's his jam. Moving on to the Cincinnati Bengals. Let me pull up their little depth chart here. In the first round, they did take a lineman, which is a much needed position for the Bengals to keep Joe Burrow healthy. He's struggled to stay healthy. He's getting knocked down a lot in Cincinnati. So I do like that they went offensive line. They also signed veteran Trent Brown to a 1-year deal in the offseason. So that is another guy that can, help fortify the O lineman. But they're hoping that Mims can be like, an anchor on that O line for years to come. He does have some growth ahead of him, and he has dealt with some injuries, which is ironic because, they're bringing him in to protect Joe Burrow from being injured, and he himself has dealt with injuries. But if he can stay healthy and develop into a good player, that means more protection for Joe Burrow, which is great for everyone. In the 3rd round, I really like this pick. They took Jermaine Burton, wide receiver out of Alabama, 6 foot, 196 pounds. He did fall a little bit in the draft, kind of for off-field concerns, but he is a really good wide receiver prospect, and Tyler Boyd is now gone off that depth chart to be a wide receiver 3 for the Titans. In addition to that, T. Higgins, their superstar wide receiver 2, opposite of Jamar Chase, he's on the franchise tag for 2024, and it just doesn't seem like he's going to be on the team after that. So Jermaine Burton could serve as their wide receiver 3 this season, but he could slot in as high as their wide receiver 2 beyond that if he plays well and Higgins goes somewhere else next year, which I predict he will. Andre Oshivas He was a bit of a dynasty sleeper. He takes a little bit of a hit here because you have to figure Burton, he's going to have every opportunity to outplay him and pass him on the depth chart. So Oshivas is a little bit of a loser there. Could be their wide receiver 3 at some point if and when Higgins is gone. And Trenton Irwin is also on this roster. So I think Jermaine Burton is a great long-term value in dynasty leagues and rookie drafts. Someone who might not have immediate payoff, but as soon as next year, and even if he serves as a wide receiver 3 this season, he might be a steal in rookie drafts. The team did also take a tight end, Eric All, out of Iowa, 6'4", 252 pounds. He did suffer season-ending injuries each of the last 2 seasons, but he showed potential when he was on the field. Also, he's an Iowa tight end, so that's a plus. They always work out, it seems like, for the most part. Mike Gesicki and Tanner Hudson are on the roster right now, and they project to be the short-term solutions there at tight end, but as well as Drew Sample. But if Eric All can progress and stick with that trend of Iowa tight ends turning into really good NFL players, I mean, he could have a shot to be a fantasy difference maker in the long term. They also took another tight end in the 6th round, Tanner McLaughlin, out of Arizona, 6'5", 244. Again, a very crowded tight end room. 6th round draft pick, very late draft capital. It'll be tough for him to make this roster, let alone make a difference. But you never know. Sometimes late round picks they surprise, but it's going to be an uphill battle for him to make the roster. Moving on to the Cleveland Browns. This one is pretty easy. We don't got to spend a lot of time on this one. They took a lineman in the 3rd round, Zach Zinter, guard, and then their real only skill position player they took was in the 5th round, wide receiver Jamari Thrash out of Louisville, 6 feet, 188 pounds. It's a crowded wide receiver room, and he has late draft capital, so it's going to be hard for him to crack this depth chart. They already have Amari Cooper, who is their solidified number 1. They just traded for Jerry Jeudy to hopefully be their wide receiver 2. They have Elijah Moore, and he didn't have a very good 2023 season, but he'll probably be on the team and get targets. They have Cedric Tillman and David Bell as well. Didn't mean to rhyme there. A poet, I didn't even know it. So yeah, tough depth chart to crack. The highest potential I think for him in the short term is to be the wide receiver 3 if he turns out to be one of those like late round guys that surprises. Especially when you consider the rough season that Elijah Moore had last year, but and the overall downward trend of Elijah Moore's career. But he's going to need a lot of things to go his way, and he's going to have to beat out some guys to make a difference on the field, to actually see the field. Final team of the AFC North, we're going to move on to the Pittsburgh Steelers. In the 1st round, they went with a lineman, Troy Fautanu. He's a versatile lineman who can play multiple positions, and he offers O-line help for the Steelers, so you'll love that. Hopefully he can protect Russell Wilson, open up rushing lanes for Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. And I say Russell Wilson, but we'll see if Justin Fields sees the field as well at some time. So they went a versatile lineman who can play multiple positions in the 1st round. And then in the 2nd round, they go lineman again, taking Zach Frazier, a center out of West Virginia. Troy Fautanu was out of Washington. So they're really trying to improve that O-line. They also took a guard in the 4th round, Mason McCormick out of South Dakota State. In terms of skill position players, I really like Roman Wilson. He was drafted in the 3rd round, 20th pick of the 3rd round, out of Michigan. He's 5'11", 185 pounds. And the Steelers, I mean, you don't like to just rely on like trends like this, but at this point, you have to give the Steelers credit. They are really great at drafting wide receivers, and they just have a high hit rate. I don't know if they just develop them really well, or if they just know like whose game is going to translate to the NFL. But that is a bonus for Roman Wilson. And this depth chart does offer Roman Wilson a chance to be a day 1 starter. Obviously, George Pickens is their hyper talented wide receiver 1. He's going to be the alpha there. But I think Roman Wilson steps in and is immediately a great compliment to George Pickens. And I think he's going to be their wide receiver 2 from day 1. I mean, if you look at the depth chart, they have Van Jefferson, who really has never produced on the field. He does a lot of cardio. He might stretch the field, but he's not going to be like target demander. Calvin Austin, Quez Watkins, Scotty Miller, Denzel Mims. I mean, Roman Wilson has every opportunity to step in and be their number 2. And his name is R. Wilson. His quarterback, R. Wilson. It's a match made in heaven. Russell Wilson, their quarterback who they brought in, who the Denver Broncos are paying a hefty bag to not be on their team. He's no longer in his prime, but he is capable enough to get the ball to these guys, especially if he can get protection with this newly fortified O-line. So I think this might be, there's so much wide receiver depth in this draft where you can get Roman Wilson like pretty late in rookie drafts, and I think he could be a steal. This isn't a bad draft. If there's not a guy that you love early in the draft, I mean, trading back, accumulating multiple picks is not a bad idea. Obviously, like I wouldn't recommend like passing up on like a Marvin Harrison, or like if you're in a super flex, passing up on like Caleb Williams or these generational prospects, but just not a bad idea to take shots on a few of these like guys who are falling just because we have so many quarterbacks being driven up by being drafted so early in the NFL draft, and just this abundance of talented wide receivers and a lot of good landing spots. So, yeah, overall, it was a big O-line draft for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I don't know, man, they're always a pretty decent team to a good team. So, whoa, my computer is doing weird things. Hey, I'm recording a hit podcast right now. Okay, we're good. Hopefully. Anyways, we're going to move on to the AFC West. Before we do that, if you are enjoying the pod, please make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you are listening. You can look me up on YouTube, The Fantasy Football Prodigy. That's where I be posting the video podcast. But we're going to move on to the AFC West. I'm going to pull up the Kansas City Chiefs here. Pull up their depth chart. Where is K in the alphabet? K, C, A, B. Okay, they're there. Okay, sorry. Okay, Kansas City Chiefs. They made a splash in the draft. They traded up with the Buffalo Bills. A lot of people were surprised that the Bills traded with them. But with the 20th pick in the first round, they select Xavier Worthy out of Texas. He is a speedster. He set the NFL Combine record for fastest 40 time with a 4.21. And this was a depth chart need. Travis Kelce is still there, and he just signed an extension, but he is aging. They also brought in Marquise Hollywood Brown in free agency, but he doesn't profile as, I mean, he'll be a difference maker, but he hasn't had like elite production, especially for fantasy. Like he's not like a wide receiver 1 type of guy, so he'll be used in his role, but they also have questions surrounding Rashee Rice, who had a great rookie year last year, but he has that whole off-field situation with the car crash, and it's kind of just, who knows, but I expect him to get a suspension, probably minimum of 4 games. I think I wouldn't be surprised to see 8 games. So they needed a wide receiver. Outside of Rice and Brown and Kelce at tight end, they had Justin Watson, Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore, Justin Ross. So all I want to say about Xavier Worthy is don't let their past wide receiver misses trick you. Worthy he's a real high quality prospect, and he has the potential to be a great redraft and dynasty player with Patrick Mahomes. He's a bit smaller at 5'11", 165, but we've seen more of those guys work out recently than in the past. And this is the guy that the Chiefs wanted, and pairing him with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid offers scary upside. I know they missed on, Sky Moore, and they reached on McCole Hardman in the draft. Sky Moore was out of a small school. There was reason to believe that he might not pan out. And McCole Hardman, in that draft, if you guys remember, it seemed like they reached on him just because he was fast, and they didn't know if Tyreek Hill was going to play that year because he had it's some sort of off-field situation looming, and I feel like they reached on him just to, get that speed just in case. But Xavier Worthy is a guy who, I think is a much more established prospect and projects to have a much better career than those guys. They also took a tackle in the second round, Kingsley Suamatia. I am butchering that. I'm sorry. Out of BYU. He's a tackle, 31st pick of the second round. And then in the last skill position player, Jared Wiley, tight end out of TCU. Big guy, 6'6", 249. Travis Kelce is still there, signed an extension, so he's not going to be the starter anytime while Travis Kelce is still playing. But you never know. Maybe down the road he's somebody. 4th round draft capital isn't nothing, but yeah, it's gonna be tough for him to be fantasy relevant. Moving on to the LA Chargers. I almost said San Diego Chargers. I will never get over that. But the 5th overall pick, they took Joe Alt, 6'9", 321 pounds, real big guy, out of Notre Dame. He was the top tackle in the draft. Extra protection for Justin Herbert. This totally fits what new head coach Harbaugh and offensive coordinator Greg Roman want the team identity to be. They want to run. And with the team not selecting another running back until the 6th round, which we'll talk about in a sec, Gus Edwards is set to be the lead back on a run-heavy offense, and he is a big winner here. J.K. Dobbins is also behind him, but his health is a little bit in question. So Gus Edwards is a big winner. It's a real good offensive line prospect to help block, and it should help protect Justin Herbert, who his value is a little depressed just with the offense that this new regime projects to want to run. But, Herbert is a good player, and in this modern NFL, you're going to have to throw the ball a little bit. So this offense could be something special. So we'll see. But they definitely were and still are, in my opinion, short on wide receiver help. They go with a wide receiver with the 2nd pick in the 2nd round, Lad McConkey out of Georgia. He's 6 feet, 186 pounds. They lost wide receivers Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. They were their top 2 targets last season, until Mike Williams tore his ACL. But Keenan Allen, he had maybe his best season ever, and they shipped him off. So they didn't want to pay him, and they desperately needed pass catchers. Joshua Palmer, DJ Chark, Quentin Johnson. Those are their next top wide receivers. They also got Will Dissly, Hayden Hurst, and Donald Parham at tight end. So Lad McConkey, he has a chance to establish himself as a top target in this offense from day one. They want to lean on the run, but like I said, Herbert's a fantastic quarterback, and the modern NFL and game situations will force them to throw the ball, hopefully enough to where if the targets are consolidated, there are depth chart opportunities to be had here for Lad McConkey. He's a slot wide receiver, so he'll probably try to replace that Keenan Allen role, which is very valuable on this team. But he just might have limited upside just because he doesn't profile as like an athletic freak. Probably more of a PPR guy, but with little threats around him and with a good quarterback, that could translate to a lot of fantasy success. In the 6th round, they took running back Kamani Vidal. Hope I'm saying that right. Vidal. They don't really have a superstar running back on the depth chart, but it's an uphill battle to even be the number 2. He'd need to beat out Isaiah Spiller, and the health of J.K. Dobbins will be a big factor. But Gus Edwards projects to be the guy. And then they also took 2 wide receivers in the 7th round with the 5th and 33rd pick, Brendan Rice, Jerry Rice's son, and Cornelius Johnson, respectively. Again, it's a crowded depth chart, but there isn't a true top-end target. So if one of these guys turns out to be one of those late-round steals, maybe they're a little more productive and difference-making than you would normally think about a 7th-round pick. But yeah, probably not. Brendan Rice's dad is arguably the greatest football player of all time, so he does have those genetics going for him, but I'd be lying if I said that normally matters. It's not like, oh, you're going to be like a great player just because your dad was. Like, he made the league. That's the genetics showing up right there, but we'll see. I'm trying to speak down on my man, okay? Anyways, moving on. The Las Vegas Raiders, a bit of a surprising pick with their 1st round pick, their first selection in the draft, 13th overall. They take tight end Brock Bowers. He was a super highly touted tight end prospect, one of the greatest tight end prospects there ever was, you might say. 6'3", 243 pounds out of Georgia. Crazy threat in the passing game. Projects to be, one of the next best tight ends. And at first glance, this landing spot isn't great. The Raiders drafted another tight end last year, Michael Mayer, in the 2nd round, which makes this move a little surprising. It remains to be seen how this duo will be used, but with Bowers he's kind of like one of those, a wide receiver that's listed as a tight end type of player, where, he's listed as a tight end. He can line up at tight end, but he could also line up in the slot. So we might see that with Michael Mayer at tight end at times. I'm sure Bowers will also be lined up at tight end. So maybe they both play tight end on the field. We'll just have to see. We'll honestly just have to see. But it does muddy the waters for Michael Mayer, and it probably limits his upside up to what he can truly become as long as they're on the team together. But I do think it's an underrated landing spot for Brock Bowers. It's not like a top end spot, but I do think there is potential here. Star wide receiver Devontae Adams is the number one target, but he is getting older. He's 31. And Jacoby Myers is their number 2. He's a great number 2 wide receiver. So I do think he'll continue to get targets. But he is a wide receiver too. And then Trey Tucker is also there as a deep threat. He's kind of a dynasty sleeper in my opinion, if you want to scoop him up. And they also just recently signed Michael Gallup and Jalen Guyton. So not super tough competition there, but you never know. They've had their moments. And they're projected to have a quarterback competition between Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew to see who will be the starter for 2024. I think Gardner Minshew wins that job, but either of those guys, they're not great, but I think they can get the ball to their targets in 2024. Beyond that, quarterback could be an issue. It's very hard to find that franchise guy. Neither of those guys are franchise quarterbacks, and even if they play well enough to supply fantasy value this year, like we saw Gardner Minshew do with the Colts last year. I mean, he filled in for Anthony Richardson, and he got Michael Pittman and he kept the offense afloat. It might be murky beyond that. But Brock Bowers is a super exciting prospect, and I think in the end, talent will win out to where he could slot in as high as the team's number 2 target as soon as this season, and maybe even the top target on the team a few years from now. We'll just have to see. We'll have to see, but very talented player. Tight ends can take a while to develop, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. But they also took a center, Jackson Powers Johnson, out of Oregon in the second round. Took a tackle, Delmar Glaze, in the third round. So a little bit of O-line help there. And then their final skill position player, the 32nd pick of the 6th round. So basically the 7th round. They draft a running back, Dylan Lobby, out of New Hampshire, 5'10", 206 pounds. Zamir White is a huge winner through free agency and through the draft. They didn't really draft any major competition for Zamir. They did bring in Alexander Madison at running back in the offseason, and I'm a Vikings fan, and I can tell you firsthand, he struggled in 2023, and I expect Zamir White to be the clear lead back. I do think Madison could have, very few running backs get psychotic levels of the workload like Christian McCaffrey does, or Kyron Williams did last year. So Madison, I think, will be the second back, and we'll see some work, but Zamir White has a chance to be a real steal. Maybe a dynasty sell, just because after this year, I don't know if he'll be the guy. But for 2024, Zamir White is set up to see the volume and potentially, be valuable for fantasy. Amir Abdullah is also on the roster, and he offers a lot of special teams value, so I think he'll still be here. So Dylan Lobby, probably not much of a difference maker. He returned 2 kickoffs and 2 punts for touchdowns in college, so maybe he makes the roster for his special teams prowess, but again, Amir Abdullah is also there, so we'll see how that pans out. Next team, the Denver Broncos. We've got a new quarterback in Mile High. First round, 12th overall. They select Bo Nix out of Oregon. He was the last of sort of that high-end group of quarterbacks to be drafted. But according to their coach, Sean Payton, he's the guy that they wanted all this time, so Jarrett Stidham is on the roster. He's a serviceable veteran, maybe will start, but wouldn't be surprised at all to see Bo Nix be the day 1 starter. They do have Zach Wilson on the roster as well, so he'll be the clear 3. But Russell Wilson is gone. Bo Nix is in. Bo Nix broke the NCAA single season record for completion percentage with 77.4%, and he led the FBS in total touchdowns in 2023 with 45 passing touchdowns and 6 rushing TDs. The kind of red flags here for Bo Nix, Oregon's offense was predominantly a run-pass option, so there are questions on how his game will translate to the NFL, but he did show traits that could fit well with head coach Sean Payton's offensive scheme. If anyone can get the best out of Bo Nix, you have to think that this is a really good landing spot for Nix to be able to utilize the skills that he has. He's often viewed as the least exciting of those highly drafted quarterbacks, but there could be value there in superflex leagues. It's not often you can get an early to mid first round quarterback in rookie drafts where he's currently going. In my single quarterback dynasty rookie draft that we just finished recently, and that we are going to go over probably on the next episode or a soon to be episode, so make sure to follow wherever you're listening. But in that draft, he went in the 4th round, which I think, take your shot. You know, you never know with these quarterbacks. It's hard to predict. So there are reasons to have questions about the guy, but it's so hard to predict quarterback success in the NFL. I think he's worth a shot in superflex leagues. You can get him late first, early second round, and in superflex leagues, that positional value is so important. Where if he's falling, he's worth a shot in my opinion, just because it's always a crapshoot with QB. After that, they took wide receiver Troy Franklin. He fell in the draft. 6'2", 176 pounds out of Oregon. He was projected to go higher, so it is a little concerning that he fell to the 4th round. But there are depth chart opportunities there. Cortland Sutton is currently on the team. Josh Reynolds, Marvin Mims Jr., Tim Patrick, Troy Franklin. So there are guys there, but if he is the talent that a lot of people thought, he should be able to beat out Tim Patrick, Josh Reynolds. Cortland Sutton might not be on this team for the long term. So we'll see how that pans out, dude. But it's a little concerning that he fell in the draft because he was expected to go higher. So a lot of times when that happens, it means the NFL teams see something that maybe other people don't, that are cause for concern, but still worth a shot. But yeah, a little concerning there. They also took a running back, Audric Estime, 5'11", 221 pounds out of Notre Dame. It's a bit of a crowded running back situation, and he doesn't have real high draft capital, but right now it's Javonte Williams, who there are question marks about how, he came back from that brutal knee injury last year and did not look good. Will he perform better this year? We'll see, but Jaleel McLaughlin is still there. He looked better than Javonte last year. Samaje Perine is still there, being an old veteran running back. So, Estime could carve out a role. We'll see. Someone to monitor. And then 7th round wide receiver, Devontez. Again, I don't want to spend too much time on these late guys, but he's 7th round pick. He's going to have to, he's going to have to beat some guys out to make some noise there. So that concludes the AFC West. We're going to move on to the AFC East. And what team should we start with here? Let's start with the Buffalo Bills. I've been waiting to talk about that. They had a pretty intriguing difference-making draft here. So they traded back in the 1st round. Like I said, the Chiefs traded up to draft Xavier Worthy. They traded with the Bills, who traded back, took Keon Coleman with the 1st pick of the 2nd round. That was their 1st pick in the draft. You have to believe that this was their guy and that they knew they could get him even while trading back, because otherwise, if you believed in a Xavier Worthy and you traded back with the Chiefs, who then took him, you're kind of strengthening your opponent quite a bit there if you think he's the guy. So I believe this is a guy that they really wanted. And this was a landing spot that all eyes were on, and this is a great spot for Keon Coleman. Great opportunity for him. The Buffalo Bills lost Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis, and that leaves a ton of vacated targets on this team. He can step in and be the number 1 wide receiver, with Dalton Kincaid at tight end figuring to also be very involved in terms of targets. The Buffalo Bills also signed Curtis Samuel in free agency, who will be utilized, and he had a pretty good year last year with Washington, but I think he'll be used as more of a close to the line of scrimmage type of player. That's kind of his archetype, whereas Keon Coleman is a big-bodied wide receiver, and I think him and Curtis Samuel will complement each other very well. This depth chart also includes Khalil Shakir, Chase Claypool, Mac Hollins, KJ Hamler, Andy Isabella. They just signed MVS, like I said earlier at the beginning of the episode. So there is a lot of depth in this wide receiver room, but there's a lack of true wide receiver 1 talent. So Coleman should step in And with the draft capital and the talent and all that, and the lack of real threats around him, he'll have a shot at being their true number one wide receiver. And I think that competition aspect of the depth chart will really kind of determine who's their wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 behind Coleman and Curtis Samuel. Another impactful pick, they took running back Ray Davis, 5'8", 211 pounds, out of Kentucky, with the 28th pick of the 4th round. It just seems like this team has always wanted a Thunder to complement James Cook's Lightning, to the point where Latavius Murray, that ancient man, was getting work and goal line carries last season. Davis himself is an older prospect for a rookie at 24 years old, but he could offer some fantasy value as the second running back in a committee on a great offense. I think James Cook will, be the guy you want, but Ray Davis, they want it to be a true committee, I think. And if, James Cook does go down at some point, Ray Davis offers great handcuff value. And he's kind of like a short, bulky guy, but he did show some pass catching ability in college. So again, that would also be more on display, I think, if James Cook were unavailable for that usual pass catching role that he has. And yeah, after that, the Bills, they took a center in the 5th, tackle in the 6th, guard in the 7th. So they took some linemen, but not until later. We're going to move on to the Patriots. They made a big move here. They hopefully got their quarterback of the future. 3rd overall, they selected quarterback Drake Maye out of North Carolina. Mac Jones did not work out, was traded away to Jacksonville, and now they're looking for their quarterback of the future, and Drake Maye will attempt to be that guy. They also signed Jacoby Brissett in free agency, and I think it's a perfect pairing where Drake Maye will likely sit and learn for at least part of the 2024 season behind Jacoby Brissett. That's what I think would be best for the team. Jacoby Brissett is a great, journeyman, veteran quarterback to learn behind. Never really gets a shot to be the true starter, but he's always a pretty good player whenever he gets a chance to start. So, a good guy to have start while Drake Maye, who has, he has some development to go through. It's not a bad situation. Maye is a great prospect with a lot of upside, but we just know how hard it is for quarterbacks to work out in the NFL. So I never want to just say oh, this guy's going to be a bust or this guy's going to be great, because you just never really know. But I just kind of want to more evaluate the situation. Obviously, Bill Belichick is gone. It's a whole new regime. And if you look at his weapons, he has Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson out of the backfield. But at wide receiver, it's a little ugly. They drafted a wide receiver in this draft who we'll talk about next. But after that, Demario Douglas, he flashed a little bit last year. I believe he was a rookie last year. More of a PPR, short area target type of guy. Kendrick Bourne, he seems to produce when he's on the field. Doesn't always get his chance to be on the field, but is a producer when he's there. But I believe is he coming off an ACL? Is that his injury? I just want to make sure. He suffered a torn ACL late in October. So question mark there. They also brought in KJ Osborne, who profiles as sort of like a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. Juju is still there, not the guy he used to be. They drafted another wide receiver later that we'll talk about. They still have Tyquan Thornton, Jalen Reagor, Keyshawn Boutte. So a ton of people, but really no one that's oh, this is the guy. I'm going to help Drake Maye. They got Hunter Henry at tight end, Austin Hooper, but again, he doesn't really have that alpha, right? So that's a little concerning. He does have mid-level wide receiver talent around him, but they did draft a wide receiver in the 2nd round, so hopefully, some of these guys can step up and help Drake Maye reach his true potential. And that guy they drafted in the second round with the 5th pick of the 2nd round, wide receiver Jaylen Polk, I don't know if you pronounce the L or not, out of Washington, 6'1", 203. They desperately needed a wide receiver, and Polk will look to be the top target for Drake Maye. I read their other wide receiver options, so obviously Polk has an opportunity to step in and be the top target from day one. This landing spot isn't viewed very highly by the fantasy community just because their offense has been so dreadful the last few years, and Mac Jones just really wasn't the guy. But I do think kind of the downward view of the offense offers some potential value with Drake Maye and Jaylen Polk. If these guys do pan out, because just because the offense was bad in the years past doesn't mean it won't be good in the future. Like, we're not super far removed from Tom Brady being there and throwing 50 touchdowns to Randy Moss. Like, obviously not comparing those at all, but teams change, things change very quickly in the NFL. So I think there is potential value here in rookie drafts. For the draft capital invested in Jaylen Polk, a guy who should be a day one starter, he's going a little late in dynasty rookie drafts. He went 23rd overall in my league's single quarterback rookie draft. So to get a guy who was an early second round pick, projects to be the number one, with a quarterback who's supposed to come in and be a difference maker, he could be a great value in rookie drafts. They also drafted a tackle in the 3rd round. Caden Wallace took a guard in the 4th round, Layden Robinson, and then they drafted a wide receiver, Javon Baker, out of UCF in the 4th round, 10th pick of the 4th round, 6'1", 202 pounds. Again, the team needed wide receiver help, and they took 2 in this draft. There's not a proven alpha number 1 in this wide receiver room, but the depth chart is littered with these number 2, number 3, number 4 wide receivers. So Baker will have to beat out some people to be relevant for fantasy purposes, but if he's talented, he just might do that. And then the final skill position players here, they took quarterback Joe Milton, 6'5", 235 out of Tennessee. He'll compete with Bailey Zappi and try to make the roster as a quarterback 3 behind Jacoby Brissett and Drake May. And then they took a tight end, Jaheim Bell, out of Florida State in the 7th round. Probably not much of a difference maker, especially with Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper there. But moving on to let's go with the New York Jets. And they went offensive line with their first pick. And honestly, I think that was a great move by them. It's not like that sexy pick that you really kind of, want as a fan to get excited about. But for this offense, I think that was the right pick. They took Olu Fashanu, 6'6", 312 pounds out of Penn State. And obviously, it's no secret the Jets offense was dreadful in 2023. But much of that disaster, that the Jets offense can rightfully be attributed to Aaron Rodgers missing all but a few plays after getting injured very early in week 1, that Achilles injury. And also the team not bringing in a competent placeholder at any point and just relying on terrible quarterback play for the rest of the year. But in addition to that, though, the O-line was just dreadful. I think that's often overlooked. And I honestly wonder what the potential of this offense would have been even had Rodgers been there, because the offensive line was just really bad. They brought in some veterans in the offseason, but the more help, the better. So investing your 1st round pick in an O-lineman, I like it. It should help the offense overall. It should help protect Rodgers coming off that injury. Should help open up running lanes for Breece Hall. And it's just a pick that should help the offense maybe stay on the field a little bit more and score more points overall. With their next pick, first pick of the 3rd round, they took wide receiver Malachi Corley out of Western Kentucky, 5'11", 207 pounds. He's a great yards after the catch threat. He actually led the nation in yards after the catch over the last 2 seasons with 1,674 yards. They already have young, talented wide receiver Garrett Wilson on that team, obviously. And they did bring in veteran, big-bodied, big play, deep threat wide receiver Mike Williams. But he is coming off an ACL, and he is nearing 30. He's on my dynasty team, so I hope I get another year of production out of him. But I think this is a really good pick for the Jets, especially because of the role that I think he's going to play. I think he'll have a short area target role with opportunities to make plays after the catch. He went in the 4th round of our dynasty rookie draft. And we have 10 teams, by the way, not 12. So that changes things a little bit. But I really love that value for a guy who might have some good opportunity with Aaron Rodgers right out of the gate. I mean, I think we're going to see this guy on the field just because I think, Garrett Wilson is their alpha. I think Mike Williams will be more downfield with Corley playing that close to the line of scrimmage role. In PPR leagues, might be someone who you can flex as soon as his rookie year this year. They also traded up to get him, which speaks volumes to their desire to have him on the team. You always like when a team goes out and gets their guy and trades up. In the 4th round, their next pick, 34th pick in the 4th round, they took Braelon Allen, running back out of Wisconsin, 6'1", 235 pounds. talented prospect, but he finds himself behind superstar running back Breece Hall. He could carve out a role as the number 2 back and be a good handcuff, but the opportunity aspect of this landing spot isn't great without an injury ahead of him. It's just not. They took a quarterback in the 5th round, Jordan Travis. He's a dual threat quarterback. Rodgers is obviously the starter, and the team did bring in veteran journeyman quarterback Tyrod Taylor to be the 2. Maybe he makes the roster as the 3, and if he's one of those late round miracle picks, maybe he'll be the starter someday. But quarterbacks drafted that late usually don't pan out to be real difference makers. And then their last skill position pick, Isaiah Davis, another running back out of South Dakota State. Again, not a great landing spot without an injury. With this being Breece Hall's backfield and his backfield alone. Obviously, he's not going to get every touch, but you know what I mean? He's the dominant running back there. And he's not even the first running back taken by the team in this draft class. Also, Israel Abanikanda is also still a thing. I don't want to overlook that. So he's still there. He is still there. Finally, we're going to move on to the Miami Dolphins to round out the AFC East. Let me pull up their little depth chart here so I can accurately convey all the fantasy goodness to you. But they didn't really take a skill position player until the 4th round. They took a tackle, Patrick Paul, out of Houston in the 2nd round. And then in the 4th round, they took a running back, Jaylen Wright, out of Tennessee, 5'11", 210 pounds. And this is a guy who I think is a real good value in dynasty rookie drafts right now. He ran the 2nd fastest 40 out of all running backs at the combine this year. And he's an explosive player who seems to fit what head coach Mike McDaniel looks for in his running backs. At first glance, this landing spot isn't great, but I do think there is potential here. First of all, the Dolphins have a great running back friendly offense. So anyone who gets opportunity there is probably going to be good. And the guys ahead of him, there are some question marks as to how long they'll be the guy or, how much opportunity they're going to get. So second of all, Raheem Mostert. He had an amazing 2023 season. I dropped him for nothing years ago when he was in San Francisco, and he was like their 3rd or 4th string running back. And of course, at age 31, 32, he had a crazy season last year, years after I dropped him, and I've seen him somehow produce for fantasy. It's just my dynasty luck is just so bad sometimes. But he had an amazing year last year, 21 total touchdowns. He was the running back 2, not a running back 2, the overall running back 2 behind only Christian McCaffrey. But he is getting older, okay? He is 32. It was an anomaly that he was able to stay so healthy last year, just given his injury and health history and his age. And even if he stays healthy for the 2024 season again, which I hope he does, he's a very likable, fast, exciting player. But even if he does stay healthy, how many more years does he actually have left after already playing past the age where most running backs fall off of that production cliff? He didn't get a ton of work early in his career, so maybe that's why he's able to play a little bit later. But his time in the league as a starter is probably coming to an end. This is probably his last meaningful year. I would project, unfortunately. And then third, Devon Achane had a crazy, unbelievable rookie season last year. I don't want to get into the metrics, but every time he touched the ball, he ripped off a chunk. He was amazing when he was on the field. I don't want to label him as injury prone just because he suffered a handful of injuries last year that kept him off the field at times, but he is just a smaller running back in general, and he doesn't profile as someone who is going to ever really be that bell cow running back who gets a ton of touches on a game-to-game basis. So Wright will step in as the running back 3, assuming he surpasses Jeff Wilson Jr., but there are chances for him to be part of a committee on an awesome offense sooner rather than later. It just takes one injury to one of those guys who don't profile as guys who are going to play 17 games. In fact, most running backs don't play 17 games. It's just the nature of the position. And even if it doesn't happen this year, it's only a matter of time before Raheem Mostert ages out. And I don't like it, but it's the truth. So that's my take on Jaylen Wright. I think he could be a little bit of a steal in rookie drafts, someone you might want to be patient with. After that, wide receiver Malik Washington out of Virginia in the 6th round. He's an exciting late round prospect. He led the FBS and broke the ACC single season record with 110 receptions last year in 2023. He might not have much opportunity in the short term with Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle there. They signed Odell Beckham Jr. as the wide receiver 3. Braxton Berrios is still there on the depth chart. But just given the awesomeness of this offense. It only takes getting an opportunity to see the field down the road for him to potentially be a fantasy difference maker. He did go undrafted in my league's 10-team 4-round rookie draft. So he's definitely, in my opinion, he's someone that's worth drafting late or even picking up as a free agent and just stashing on your taxi squad just to see if he ever gets that chance. And then they also took another late wide receiver in the 7th, Washington. It was a Taj Gibson. Man, speaking of the Wolves, man, they were up 2-0. What's going on with them? But anyways, 5'10", 174 pounds out of USC. The 7th round. Just like Malik, he needs to crack the depth chart to get on the field, but anyone who gets a chance to see the field could potentially be a fantasy difference maker. So 7th round pick has a lot of, he has a lot going against him, but you never know. You just never know. And then we're going to move on to the last division, the AFC South. We're going to start with the Indianapolis Colts. They took an edge rusher. I believe they had the first defensive player in the draft. They took edge rusher out of UCLA, Latu. So that's crazy to get the first defensive player of the draft that late, but so many offensive players went, which again, that's why there's so many good values in rookie drafts right now, I feel like. I wish I had more draft capital this year. I only had one 4th round pick because I mortgaged my future to win a title. So hopefully it pans out when I win it all this year. Anyways, but in the 2nd round, the Indianapolis Colts took Adonai Mitchell, wide receiver out of Texas, 6'2", 205. He's an explosive player, and he got 2nd round draft capital to catch passes from Anthony Richardson. It remains to be seen, how Richardson will supply fantasy goodness to wide receiver options. He showed some ability to do it last year, but then he got hurt after only, a few games and played partial games. So he's got to stay healthy first and foremost. So Josh Downs is also on this roster as a young wide receiver talent. He flashed early last year, but he faded down the stretch. So he potentially takes a hit here if Mitchell really just takes over that number 2 role. And Michael Pittman just signed a big contract extension. He was and is their established wide receiver 1, at least before this pick, and I expect that to continue. But there could be a little bit of a logjam at targets, especially with that mobile quarterback. Depending, when the play breaks down, does he just take off and run, or does he try to look downfield and get it to these wide receivers? Usually, mobile quarterbacks they'll opt to run more often than one of those pocket passer guys. It just makes sense. I expect Mitchell to kind of be the vertical threat, Pittman to just continue being the awesome possession wide receiver that he has been, and Downs to probably just play more of a slot role. So there's opportunity there, but it remains to be seen how the targets will be distributed. They took tackle in the 3rd round, Matt Goncalves, a center in the 4th, Tanner Bortolini. And then they took another wide receiver in the 5th round, 7th pick of the 5th round, Anthony Gold. They brought in another wide receiver. He doesn't have the draft capital of Mitchell. And with Pittman established on the depth chart and Josh Downs likely holding Gold off on the depth chart, he'll have to battle his way onto the field. But, there is some goodness to be had on this offense. So if it's kind of like the Miami situation, like if you can see the field, you never know. With these late guys, it's hard to sit here and be like, oh yeah, I expect this guy to beat out these established players, but it happens. So I just want to mention their names. We're going to move on to Jacksonville. The Jacksonville Jags in the 1st round took Brian Thomas Jr. with a 23rd overall pick, 6'3", 209 out of LSU. Very explosive player. He got... I was reading the wrong thing. He is an explosive player. That remains true. He did lose, or the team did lose Calvin Ridley in free agency, and they did sign Gabe Davis in free agency, but that couldn't be the only guy they brought in to replace Calvin Ridley. So they invest 1st round draft capital in an exciting prospect, Brian Thomas Jr., and he's an LSU wide receiver, right? So it's a slam dunk that he's going to be great, right? Well, kind of like the Iowa tight ends. Not always, but again, it's just a trend. LSU wide receivers often, their game translates well to the NFL. Not a guarantee, but it's just something to note. He did lead the FBS in receiving touchdowns in 2023 with 17. He ran the 2nd fastest 40-yard dash out of all the receivers at the combine with a 4.33. He's a big play guy, a much needed target for Trevor Lawrence, and his weapons now include Brian Thomas Jr., Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis, Parker Washington, and then he's got Evan Ingram at tight end, Travis Etienne out of the backfield. I do have Trevor Lawrence on my dynasty team, and Tua is my other quarterback. I also took Michael Penix for the taxi squad. So I need one of those guys to step up. Hopefully it's Trevor Lawrence. They did cut Zay Jones, like I said earlier, which he showed rapport with Trevor Lawrence in 2022 before an injury-riddled 2023. So, again, like they lost that depth there, but Parker Washington was kind of a sleeper, so maybe he steps in and is that, kind of lower down the depth chart in case of emergency type of guy. And Thomas will have a shot to be an electric fantasy player this year, and he has a lot of upside. He can hopefully elevate Trevor Lawrence to finally taking that next step and putting up a truly difference-making fantasy season, because that's what I would like as a manager of him in Dynasty. They took a tackle in the 4th, Javon Foster out of Missouri. And then in the 5th round, they took a running back, Keelan Robinson out of Texas. It's a crowded running back room led by Travis Etienne. They drafted Tank Bigsby last year, I believe, in the 3rd round, although he really didn't look that good last year in his rookie season. So the jury's still out on him, but they also have Dearness Johnson on the roster. Just a real exceptional backup, right? So maybe Robinson climbs the depth chart if he, plays his way there, but he only had 82 carries in his 3 seasons at Texas. He had 12 last year, and he really made his mark as a kick returner and as a kick cover guy. So if he makes the team, it'll likely be for special teams purposes. We're going to go on to the Houston Texans. They took a tackle in the 2nd round, Blake Fisher out of Notre Dame. They took a tight end, their first skill position player, in the 4th round, Cade Stover out of Ohio State. Not a super exciting landing spot, honestly. They have Dalton Schultz there, who looked good last year, signed an extension. He should be the guy in the immediate and future. And they do also have Brevin Jordan on the roster, who is a talented backup tight end. So he'll struggle to make a fantasy impact without a depth chart shakeup. But they did invested 4th round draft capital in him, so it's not nothing, but it's not to the point where it's like, oh yeah, he's guaranteed a shot, And then they took a running back, Jawar Jordan out of Louisville in the 6th round. Late draft capital, team traded for Joe Mixon this offseason. They still have Damian Pierce and Dare Agumbawale. But Jordan was a good kick returner in college, so if he makes the team, he'll probably make his mark on special teams. And then the final team we're going to talk about here is the Tennessee Titans to wrap up the AFC draft recap. They took a tackle, offensive lineman, with their first pick, 7th overall, J.C. Latham out of Alabama. Big boy, 6'6", 342. So he was a right tackle, and the team has a hole at left tackle, so he might be asked to play left tackle. I don't really love the running back situation with Pollard and Spears splitting touches on a questionable offense, but they do have a blocker to run behind, and fair play to the Titans. They're bringing in a lot of weapons for Will Levis, who actually did flash a little bit as a rookie, so I think they're a dark horse candidate to be like one of those better than you expected offenses next year. Just a dark horse candidate. Not trying to shake the boat too much, but just keep an eye out for them. And Will Levis, he did flash as a rookie, so if things click right, and they have Calvin Ridley, they brought in Tyler Boyd, DeAndre Hopkins is still there. They got 2 running backs who can make plays and catch passes out of the backfield. They're a dark horse to exceed expectations. That's all I'm saying. Other skill position player, all they did, wide receiver Jaquan Jackson out of Tulane in the 6th round. It's a crowded wide receiver room, but he did return. I believe he returned punts. Am I right about that? Jaquan Jackson, is he a punt returner? I'm not sure. I thought I heard somewhere that he returned punts. Maybe I'm making that up right now. Out of Tulane, but it's going to be hard for him to actually, make a difference just with this depth chart. And this thing I'm reading, I don't actually see anything about punt returns. So I might have just made that up. Apologies to Jaquan Jackson. But yeah, that's going to do it for the draft recap here. We covered all the teams. Make sure to follow and subscribe wherever you're listening. I just wrapped up my 2024 Dynasty rookie draft, like I talked about, single quarterback, in my real life league, where I didn't have a lot of draft capital, but in the next episode, I'm just going to go over all the picks, talk about potential values, some reaches. Maybe it's not a super flex draft, but I will touch a little bit on super flex if I can. And it's going to be a good episode, so you don't want to miss that. So make sure to follow or subscribe and just stay tuned to become a fantasy football prodigy. Thank you all for listening. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.
They said eventually you'll find it out there, along the hollow in the misty air, between the mountains and the hills somewhere, calling out to you in the depths of despair. They said